Today I wanted to talk about something conceptual, something that hasn't happened but could happen. So bear with me, close your eyes, and picture this. It is December 31st, 2022, so this current year. It is the Fiesta Bowl or the Peach Bowl, one of the college football playoff semifinals, or even better, the college football playoff national championship game, which is Monday, January 9th. And the two teams that take the field are Michigan and Ohio State. Now, I'm not saying this is going to happen this year because I don't think it will. I think that frankly, Ohio State beating Michigan, which I have is occurring, I think that will be enough to knock Michigan out of the playoff race unless a lot of upsets, which are possible, happen. I have Michigan going 11-1, losing to Ohio State, and I have Ohio State going 12-0 in the regular season, and in all honesty, 13-0, and winning in the Big Ten championship game. But today we're going to talk about, and we're going to read an article that discusses the ramifications of what a college football playoff matchup between these two teams would be. And we're going to talk about how awesome it is, some of the shared history between these programs, talk about what I think these two teams will be next year, how I think they'll match up next year, and talk about some of their schedules. And it's just talking about these two teams. But despite it being very unlikely that these two teams will meet up, because even though these two teams, they control their own destiny to a certain extent, in order for them to match up in the playoff, there'd have to be a lot of outside factors that would go their way. Like, for example, I think that the SEC champion would have to have one loss, and Ohio State or Michigan would have to be undefeated, because let's be honest here, whether it's actually SEC bias or the SEC is a deeper conference, which is debatable by both sides. I tend to think that a little bit of both are true. I think the Big Ten is the deeper conference, but the SEC's top tier teams are also better than the Big Ten's top tier teams for the most part. So there's some truth on both sides. More often than not, the truth is somewhere in the gray when it comes to most topics regardless. But whether that's true or not, it's reality. An undefeated SEC champion is 99% of the time going to be ranked higher than an undefeated Big Ten champion. More likely than not. Let's just be real about it. Especially because Georgia is dominant in the East and Alabama's dominant in the West, whereas in the Big Ten, it's really only the Big Ten East that has any kind of domination. No Big Ten West team is going to be viewed as a national contender unless someone breaks the mold in the Big Ten West. But so yeah, there'd be a lot of different factors that would be outside of these teams' control, like how the SEC, the Pac-12, how all the other Power 5 schools play out. It'd be out of their control. And the more upsets, the better, excluding both of these teams if they would want to meet in the college football playoff. Michigan, if they go 11-1 and lose to Ohio State, and let's say the ACC doesn't field a playoff team again, the Pac-12 doesn't field a playoff team again, maybe the Big 12 doesn't even field a playoff team again. The more conferences are knocked out of the playoff discussion, the better, especially because the SEC and Big Ten are given the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the depth of the conference. Like Alabama and Georgia in 2017 and in 2021 sent two teams to the playoff. And those two teams eventually met up in the national title game, which further solidifies a foundation that believes that the SEC is by far the best conference. It gives them benefit of the doubt, and rightfully so. The Big Ten, despite not having nearly the same results, does also get benefit of the doubt. You know, at one point, I think there were 4 or 5, I think it was 5 Big Ten teams in the top 10. Do not tell me that that is not benefit of the doubt when that was early in the year And all 5 of those teams really did not play a truly great team. They all had yet to match up against each other. But anyway, that was just me explaining, different factors and such, because that's what this video is talking about. It's just me talking about really an interesting topic and what I want to talk about. And I don't really do these videos often. I tend to like to keep it to reality, but someone a few months ago when I asked for content wanted some hypotheticals to be talked about, more what-if scenarios that were pertaining to last year, like what if a certain play went another way? And I didn't necessarily know how to do that without sounding pretty neutral, and I like to sound as neutral as I can unless I'm talking about my own team in Michigan. But here we are, and I think that this is a good what-if topic. So now I'm going to read to you an article by sportingnews.com by Bill Bender, and the title of this is Which Dream College Football Playoff Matchup Equals Duke, North Carolina in the Final Four? And obviously this article was written nearly 2 weeks ago, but I looked at it, I found it interesting. I'm going to read the part on the Ohio State-Michigan section, which is just a paragraph or 2 or 3, but I find it interesting. And then from there, we're going to talk about how these teams, how I think they're going to perform this season, the likelihood that they can match up in the college football playoff, and just the shared history between them a little bit. So this article, it talks about how the Final Four fantasy came true this year. Bitter rivals Duke and North Carolina will meet for the first time in the NCAA tournament in a matchup of programs that have combined for 11 national titles and 38 Final Four appearances. The added bonus is this will be legendary Duke coach Mike Krzyzewski's final season, and Duke has a chance to avenge the loss to the Tar Heels in his final home game on March 5th, which obviously did not happen. Duke, I think, led at halftime, and then, which they did against North Carolina in their final home game, and they lost the lead. It's on the short list of most anticipated semifinal matchups ever, and of course we're going to make the transition to football rivalries. Could the CFP ever produce a semifinal matchup of this magnitude? What would be the equivalent? The 2014 Sugar Bowl between Alabama and Ohio State remains the most watched CFP semifinal of the last 8 years, but Duke, North Carolina is more than a coaching rivalry between Nick Saban and Urban Meyer. There are only a few hypothetical CFP matchups that could get in the Duke, North Carolina stratosphere. The short list would be Alabama versus Auburn, which I completely agree. That would be something that I would watch, even though I don't even know who I'd cheer for there. A Florida State, Miami combo, that I think would be honestly even more interesting than Alabama and Auburn, just because Florida State, and Miami, I think have better histories than Auburn do, and they've all, 1990s, 2000s, had a really dominant stretches with these teams. You had Steve Spurrier for Florida, and then Urban Meyer, squeezing in Ron Zook, which we won't talk about in between them. You had Larry Coker, who before he fell off commanded some of the most talented Miami teams ever. His predecessor was Butch Davis. That's at Miami. And then Florida State, you had Bobby Bowden. And though all those coaching spheres, I guess, those were amazing. Great histories between these programs that would draw a lot of viewership too, as it's Florida, highly populated, 3 different very popular teams with fans all around the country. Oklahoma and Texas would be another one as well. It's a rivalry full of hatred, and conference dominance is a factor there. These 2 teams have dominated their respective conferences. Texas really hasn't dominated the Big 12, but they have won a national title while they were in the Big 12, and still are for now, and competed for another. So those are the other teams, but Michigan and Ohio State, the article concludes, is the best answer to Duke, North Carolina. And I would completely, whether it's biased or unbiased, and I admit that there is a little bit of both, I agree. This game has its own historians. In 2016, former Michigan Sports Information Director Bruce Medej tried to grasp what a CFP matchup between Ohio State and Michigan would feel like while swapping stories with New York Times best-selling author John Bacon and Ohio State historian Jack Park. I don't know if that would be the 10-year war, Matt, as said before pounding the table, but it would be the start of something that would be unbelievable. It would be awesome. It would further fuel a rivalry that it's been very one-sided for the past 2 decades. Michigan just won their first game this season against Ohio State since 2011. They beat Ohio State for the first time in a ranked matchup since 2003, a top 10 ranked matchup. Actually, I think it was top 5 to be more specific. I think the 2003 matchup was also a top 5 matchup. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. But it would be unbelievable. It would be amazing, in my opinion. Two largest fan bases, or two of the largest fan bases in the nation, both from the same conference, arguably the best rivalry in history, matching up against each other. That, in my opinion, would be utterly phenomenal. And speaking of that, let's look in some of the deep history and then get into how I think these two teams will do this year. This playoff matchup would feature almost 2,000 combined wins, and both of these programs, Michigan, I think, is on an upward trend. We'll see what kind of upward trend it is, whether they're going to be a permanent CFP contender or they're just going to, get 10, 11 wins, maybe an occasional playoff appearance. Anyway, I think they're trending in the upward direction. Ohio State, despite some people asking and questioning the legitimacy of Ryan Day, A, it's hard to win a national title, and B, he's gotten minimum 11 wins, and even if you count the COVID year, let's be real, 2020 Ohio State would have probably went undefeated or just suffered one loss in a standard season because of how weak the Big Ten was in 2020. Part of that, again, was due to the COVID year, but the conference was weak in 2020. It was the polar opposite of what it was in almost every other year in the past decade. It was very weak in 2020, again, mainly due to COVID. A 73% combined all-time record in win percentage. That's amazing. That basically means that these two programs combined would win 3 out of every 4 of the games they played. And that's including their down years. It includes Michigan's, who used to be they're still, I think, the winningest all-time program by number of wins, but by percentage they were surpassed by Ohio State and maybe, I think, even Notre Dame and maybe even Bama. But before the Rich Rod years, before the Hoke years, they were up there. They were number 1. And this includes their down years, like Ohio State's and the sole one in 2011, and Michigan's from 2008 to, really, if we got to be honest here, probably until 2021. I would say that's a down period for sure. 82 combined conference titles. Michigan has, I think, 43, and Ohio State has 39. Yeah, that works out to 82. These two teams dominate the Big Ten. Ohio State has dominated the Big Ten since the 2000s under Jim Tressel. John Cooper, even with his negative history, and it makes sense as to why he has a negative history, he even had some teams that dominated in Big Ten play. He had a few Big Ten titles. You go all the way back to, the Woody Hayes versus Bo Schembechler days. Those two dominated their conference. And Lloyd Carr had several Big Ten conference championships. Jim Tressel did. Urban Meyer had several. Ryan Day, 2 out of 3 of his years, he has won the Big Ten. Jim Harbaugh, he only has 1. So there's a lot of combined successes you can see. We can go even further. 19 combined national titles. A lot of Michigan's, where I will admit myself as a Michigan fan, they were from ages ago, but there's an interesting thought in my mind where, it is fair to, in a certain sense, it's fair to discount them, and in a certain sense, it's also not. So I listed them up here because history is history. It's important regardless, even if the game was played differently. It showed that Michigan certainly has a history, even despite its down period ever since Lloyd Carr left, and hopefully that ends after this past year's success. It's history. But for the most part, Ohio State has been the main contributor for the past few years, winning it in 2014 under Urban Meyer, winning it in 2002 under Tressel, and competing in 2006 and 2007 after those years under Jim Tressel as well. Michigan also won a national title in 1997. Finally, 860 combined NFL draft picks. These teams are NFL machines. Machines is the only way to describe it. I think Notre Dame and USC are the only other programs that by far are more successful than these two when it comes to producing NFL talent. These two are NFL factories. Michigan in the past few years, it's been mainly on the defensive side of the ball. I think all of their first rounders in the past few seasons, except for Cesar Ruiz, who was offensive lineman, I think their first rounders have been primarily defensive players. Ohio State, a lot more first round talent, but they've had it on both the defensive and offensive side of the ball. Regardless, both of these teams, even with some of Jim Harbaugh's lack of success in previous years, honestly, NFL factory, which was odd because you could develop NFL talent, especially on the defensive side of the ball, but it did take him 7 years to finally get somewhere. And this isn't bashing him or anything. It's context. And context it's important. Michigan has been in a down stretch, and it has taken 7 years for Jim Harbaugh to possibly, because this year could be a one-off year. We don't know yet. We don't live in the future. It took him 7 years to possibly get us out of the muck that Rich Rod and Hoke left us in. Ohio State, they're going to have a very successful draft. Same with Michigan in both this coming draft. Michigan will still primarily be defensive. Aiden Hutchinson and Daxton Hill, possibly David Ojabo, even though he's injured, so I doubt he'll get drafted in the first round. Those are the three players that could be first-round draft picks. Aiden Hutchinson's definitely going to be a first-rounder, definitely top 5 pick, unless something crazy happens. Ohio State's probably going to get Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson drafted in the first round. So Ohio State will be mostly purely offensive, Michigan purely defensive when it comes to the first round. And last but not least, a 59-51-6 record in favor of Michigan as it stands today. Though Ohio State is quickly catching up, and Michigan has a tall order when it comes to beating Ohio State this year, as they have to travel to Columbus for the first time since 2018, when Ohio State won 62-39 in a game that I wish did not exist even after this year's victory. So now we'll briefly go over, just for a few minutes and then close out this video, how I think these two teams will do. So Michigan has a pretty, honestly, it's a cupcake schedule. And you may be saying, well, they have to play at Iowa. Michigan State could always upset them. If you're like me, you think, oh, maybe Nebraska has a chance. Or if you're like other people, you think maybe Penn State has a chance, But here's the thing. Honestly, if Michigan is going to be a top 10 team, you look at their schedule, Michigan State's likely not going to be a top 10 team. They have too many questions. They lose a player who... Watch the Michigan State games without Kenneth Walker and describe to me how that's a top 10 team without him. And they'll get it figured out. They'll be a good team. It's the same thing with Nebraska. Even though I think Nebraska's on an upward trend, they don't have the talent that Michigan does, nor do I even think they have the coaching. Michigan State might, and to a certain degree does, as proven by this past season in 2020, have the coaching to handle Michigan. I don't even know if Nebraska has the coaching to handle Michigan. Iowa has the head coach. They do not have the offensive coordinator, and they don't have the offense to handle Michigan. Michigan's 3 toughest games outside of Ohio State, Michigan has a I'd say a wide, severely better chance at beating their opponent than losing to them, in my opinion. Michigan opens up against Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, and Maryland, 4 straight home games before traveling to play Iowa and Indiana. returning home to play Penn State and Michigan State. There's a bye squeezed in there somewhere. And then they play at Rutgers, host Nebraska and Illinois, before traveling to the Ohio State Buckeyes, which I think, again, will be their only loss. I think they'll finish 11-1, 8-1 in conference. Their ceiling, I think, is 12-0. Their floor is 9-3. I could see this team disappointing and going 9-3 despite what they return and their easy schedule. It's totally possible. And I think 12-0, it's a ceiling, but ceilings along with floors are unlikely. So I'm thinking Michigan's going to be in that 10-2, 11-1 range. And I've given some of my own rough estimates of their chances to win out, go undefeated in the regular season. I think it's just below 15%. Ohio State, speaking of them, is just around 40%. And that's a very high number, but again, I look at their schedule and it's tough. It's much tougher than Michigan's. It's a better resume builder. I think Ohio State could afford to suffer a loss and they won't be excluded from the playoff. Ohio State opens up against Notre Dame, Arkansas State, and Toledo, Wisconsin, and Rutgers. 5 straight home games. And even though Wisconsin and Notre Dame, those could be ranked matchups. Notre Dame certainly will be. Wisconsin likely will be. Those two teams, in my opinion, don't have the horses, whether it's on the coaching staff or the talent, to compete with this Ohio State team. They might compete for a few quarters, but eventually Ohio State should wear them out. At Michigan State is probably Ohio State's, I would say, third toughest game behind Michigan and Penn State. That game, Ohio State still matches up with them very well. Ohio State would have to overlook them, which no matter how easy or tough the opponent, you should never overlook them. Any coach will tell you that. They should beat the Spartans. Iowa, that could, just knowing who Kirk Ferentz is, that could be a tough game. But Ohio State should be able to squeeze that game out at the minimum. At max, they'll eventually wear them down and beat them down. At Penn State, could be a tough one. Penn State always plays Ohio State close, but I don't think this Penn State team this year is going to be very good. I think this is James Franklin's. Honestly, this is his grace year. I think that this year, after the contract he signed, he could go 7-5 again. And as long as he shows promise at the end of the year, some of those true freshman impact players like Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, Danny Dennis Sutton, as long as they look good, I think he can be safe. At Northwestern, hosting Indiana, playing at Maryland, those are going to be mostly cakewalks. The Michigan game, I think it'll be Ohio State's toughest game, but I think that they will win it. I have a hard time seeing Michigan win this game, though I don't have as hard of a time seeing Michigan win in Columbus this year as I did Michigan beating Ohio State last year. And that's because Michigan, they finally did it. They finally broke through, so it no longer seems, to me, as someone who's a young fan, as impossible for Michigan to win. I think Ohio State goes 13-0, winning the Big Ten championship game, and I give them around a 40% chance to win out. So either way, it would take likely both teams going 11-1 at minimum for them to have a chance to reach the CFP. One of them would have to win the Big Ten, or their only loss be sustained in the Big Ten championship game, which normally, outside of Georgia last year, would be an absolute death sentence. Both of these teams, again, would likely have to get 11 or more wins to reach it, only sustain one loss, as no team has reached the CFP with more than one loss before. The chances of this happening with outside factors, Ohio State and Michigan would have to be ranked first and fourth for them to match up in the semifinals. And if they weren't ranked that but got in the CFP anyway, they'd both have to win their games, which is extremely tough to match up in the national title. The odds of this happening are very slim, but I think that this year, seeing that I have both of these teams as top 4 teams, even though I think Michigan will end up not reaching the CFP, not because they're not a top 4 team, but because of how the scheduling alignment, how conference champions are favored and such, I don't think they'll make it, but it's possible. I think it's the most possible it's been in a long time for this to happen. And by a long time, I mean since 2014. But you get the point. It's possible, very unlikely, but it would sure be an awesome game seeing both of these teams, who I think will be more offensive than defensive teams. Michigan's powerful run game, which might be the best in the conference, probably will be, facing off against Ohio State's passing attack, which I think more certainly than Michigan's run game will be the best in the conference. And that's all I have to say for this video. I hope this matchup happens somehow. I hope that both of these teams get to play for it all. That would be something else. I would be glued to the screen, my phone locked in a case. I probably wouldn't even, if I had to not eat through this matchup, which I have a big stomach and it would be hard, but if I had to not eat to watch this whole thing through, never take my eyes off the TV, I would do so much to see this game happen. Comment your thoughts down below on this game, if you would like to see it, who you think would win, depending on who wins in the regular season. It's hard to beat a good team 2 times in a row. Thank you all for watching. Again, comment your thoughts down below, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts for the 3rd time down below, and I'm likely to respond because I love responding to comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.